first session of the afternoon, which is going to be on openBIM for infrastructure and transportation. We're very pleased to have representatives from AASHTO and the Department of Transportation come to speak about the US's approach to standardize and move towards digital practices and ways of working. And we also have a representative from the Ministry of the BC Ministry of Transport will talk about their approach. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mike Bousliman, who's the chair of the Joint Subcommittee on Data Standardization for AASHTO, as well as Will Sharp, Senior Vice President for HDR. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks, Eric, for the introduction. And we're going to talk about the U.S. transportation agencies driving toward openBIM. And this is the agenda for the presentation today. Wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how we're shifting to digital delivery and open standards in the U.S. Wanted to talk about the new AASHTO Joint Committee on Data Standardization. Mike Bousliman is going to help cover that part. A few industry considerations, what do contractors feel about this? What do consultants feel about this? And then some key takeaways. So the shift to digital delivery, if you were here this morning, you might have already seen this slide, but I know different people are going different groups, but there's been a lot of movement in the U.S. toward what we call model as a legal document, and these are signed and sealed 3D deliverables. They take precedence over the 2D plans. In some cases, they replace the 2D plans. So there's been a big movement in the U.S. toward model as a legal document. There's been a number of pilots that the state DOTs have done. The states in green have actually designed and built projects with model as a legal document, both roadway and bridge designs, and have those lessons learned. In some cases, you'll hear from George Lukes a little later, they've done multiple generations of these projects and are getting better and better at it. The states in orange are working on their first pilot, model as legal document, and the ones in blue, this is in their strategic plan to move to model as legal document. So we're seeing a lot of movement in this, and I can tell you every few months there's more color on this map, so there continues to be a lot of good momentum in the U.S. with model as legal document. And I personally draw a tie to open data standards and model as legal document. One of the key challenges we have with this approach is the contractors still struggle with the data. The data is in a proprietary format. It's hard for them to use with their tools and their processes. So I draw a parallel, I guess, between open data standards, the need for that, and model as legal document. So there's also a number of AASHTO transportation pooled fund efforts. And what these are, they're typically 3 to 5 year projects where the different state DOTs can pitch in money to support more national initiatives. And there's two here that I've got on the screen, BIM for bridges and structures and BIM for infrastructure. And these have been just critical projects to move ahead nationally. And like the BIM for bridges and structures, developing a national data standard that all the states can use. So this has really been a key component of the movement in the U.S. Toward open data standards is these pooled funds. And this is a slide from the BIM for Bridges pooled fund and kind of shows you their focus. And I've actually worked on this project 4 years, and they had a focus from day one. The main goal of this project was to develop that national standard for open exchange of bridge and structure data. It's IFC based, and they really wanted to focus that on the design to construction and fabrication use. So that's been a key focus of this job. It's been a great job to work with. We've worked with the software vendors, we've worked with the different states, and it's just been a really fascinating job to work on. There's also been a number of digital delivery initiatives at the state level. So and there's 3 that I've got here. Pennsylvania DOT has their Digital Delivery Directive 2025, where they're trying to move their entire organization to model as a legal document and digital delivery by 2025. Utah DOT, we'll hear from George in a few minutes, but they've been very active. They've they've probably done more model as legal document of any state in the U.S., and they've really been focusing on that repeatable process for design to construction, have those repeatable deliverables for the contractors. And then Iowa DOT just recently approved their strategic plan for digital delivery, their roadmap. This was just approved by their leadership in the last month or so. And there's a number of other state DOTs that are doing similar efforts. But a lot of folks realize this is a big change. To move your entire agency to digital delivery, it takes planning. You really need to critically think that through. And we're seeing a lot of movement on that at the state level. And I just wanted to give you an idea of just how these projects work. This is the Iowa DOT. This is their organization chart. And let's see, I think one more. Yep. These are all the different groups that we interviewed to develop the strategic plan. So it's just not about project development. We interviewed the construction folks, the traffic operations folks, the maintenance folks, the staff in the districts as well as central office, the IT folks, the GIS folks, the asset management folks, research and analytics. So it's very much looking broadly across the organization. What are those pain points that we have, and how can we make that data flow through the project lifecycle? So the next, I'll turn it over to Mike to talk about the new JSTAN group.
Thank you, Will. And new is maybe the operative word here. I'll give you guys a little bit of background. First of all, Mike Bousliman. I'm the CIO at the Montana Department of Transportation, and my role here today is to represent AASHTO as the chair of the Joint Committee on Data Standardization. I'm going to talk a little bit about the committee, the history, but really more on where we're headed so that you can understand the direction the committee's going. The history, briefly, I think Will mentioned 2019, AASHTO had a resolution to adopt IFC, but more importantly, the creation of this committee. And that was 3 years ago, so 2020, I think everybody knows what happened. We kind of hit a snag of sorts, and things didn't move as fast as we had hoped. My actual involvement came about a year ago, and I think we've gotten a little bit of momentum since then. I will say I feel pretty good about where we're at. It's a pretty complex set of committees. You have 50 states and dozens of AASHTO committees, so trying to get this group together with representation from multiple committees and figure out our charge has been our first challenge. The mission to champion, coordinate the implementation of open data standards, among other things. I think we all understand that common goal, that common mission, and that's really what this group is intended to do, is to try to coordinate across disciplines and across committees to be sure we're not creating duplicative efforts and we're satisfying the needs of the DOTs and trying to do it in a cohesive fashion. JSTAN committee membership, you can see from all over the country. I'm going to talk a little bit just quickly about where these people, where their discipline lies. I chair the data management, I don't chair the data management and analytics committee. That's the committee that represents the chair in this role, and John Kraus from Florida and I are both representing that committee, but we have representation from the design committee, construction committee, the bridges and structures committee, the AASHTO Aware committee, which is AASHTO Aware is a consortium of software that is supported, developed collaboratively by the AASHTO members. That includes things like bridge management, construction management products, safety, pavement. So representation from that committee is very important, and then the performance-based management committee is represented in this group, as well as several AASHTO staff members from those various disciplines supporting our work. Current activities. Just in the last probably 6 months, we've been building the website. Last summer, we spent a fair amount of time with reaching out to the committees with these members, going to their respective committees to kind of share the message, talk about what this committee intends to do, starting to develop a regular meeting cadence, and finally the joining buildingSMART. That's kind of a key goal, and I'll talk specifically to that. There's the AASHTO annual meeting is going on right now in Orlando and goes through the weekend, and our resolution to officially become a buildingSMART member is in front of the Streets and Councils group as well as the CEOs, and I'm not going to speculate, but I anticipate it'll get approved. We have a temporary short-term funding source in place to maintain our membership and participate in these meetings. So we're looking forward to hearing the final outcome of that Sunday night, Monday morning, and then take the next steps to become more involved and engaged in the buildingSMART community. And just high-level strategic goals, I'll tell you a little bit about. We had a planned in-person two-day meeting for the last week of September, and the IHEAP meeting down in Fort Myers was the location. I think everybody knows what happened the last week of September in Fort Myers. We didn't meet, obviously. We all evacuated and went about our ways. So our planned first in-person two-day meeting to really talk about these strategic goals, develop them, refine them, didn't happen. We're setting up a series of virtual, back to the old virtual, shorter meetings and start taking this in bits and pieces. But a few things of note. What's important to understand, the coordination is key. Mike Kennerly is going to talk about his group. We don't want to do work that he's doing, and inclusion is important. We want the right people at the table to participate, not only from a review and development, but from an understanding where the group is headed. Explore options for schema development and participation. I talked about inclusion. Actively participate with buildingSMART. And last but certainly not least, and maybe one of the most important aspects, is working with the industry, because obviously this is a partnership and we can't do this alone. We don't want to do it alone. All of our partners who deliver those services for us need to be at the table and participating in the development of all of this work that we're doing. So that's a high-level overview of our committee. I'm going to save Will a little bit of time to finish up here. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, I really see this JSTAN committee as foundational to what we're trying to do in the U.S., just a critical committee to coordinate throughout AASHTO, our movement to open data standards. So I did want to touch on industry considerations as well and touch on a few ideas here. And this is a question I get a lot. You know, I'm a consulting engineer. You know, I stamp plans, and you know, how is risk different when using BIM as a contractual deliverable? You know, how is risk different when you're asking a professional engineer to sign and seal a digital deliverable? So we took that question to an organization, ACEC, our American Council of Engineering Companies, and did a national survey. You know, what are your concerns with this? And these are the top 5 that they identified. You know, data security, the first one. You know, if it's a signed and sealed deliverable, it's got to be locked down. It's got to be secure. You got to have clear definitions of model accuracies and tolerances. You know, what am I trying to create with this model? How accurate? How do you QC these models? You know, if this is a contractual deliverable, you know, if there's issues down the road, that could be a real problem. So what's a process to QC those? Also, lack of contractor experience, especially the smaller subcontractors. You know, many of them are not using BIM. A lot of the larger ones are. And then the last one is investment. You know, just realizing it's going to take a learning curve, software, training to invest staff. So these were the 5 top risks identified. And what we ended up doing is I worked with a guy by the name of John Rathke with another consulting firm, and we worked with Mike Kennerly and his AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards to not only articulate the concerns of the consulting industry, but also talk about, well, how do we mitigate those concerns? You know, how do we address those concerns? So we had a lot of good discussion with this committee and really talked about, you we call them foundational principles. You know, what are those core concerns that we have? And then what are the mitigation measures? And things like level of development definitions, you know, having a framework for a national definition for level of development for horizontal infrastructure. That was one key area. We wanted to be very clear, too, on these models and what they're for and what they're not for. And, you know, we developed this national model element breakdown framework with Mike's committee that really got at element by element in the model. You know, what's the authorized use of that information? What's the limitation of that information? Is it contractual? Is it just for information only? So just being very clear on these digital deliverables on, you know, intended use and limitation. So that was a great process to work through and to work collaboratively with the AASHTO JTC ES group. We've also had a lot of discussion with the contractors. You know, where are they at in this process? Well, I have worked with the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, and they have come on board. You know, they put out a digital construction policy statement last year, and they've come out and said, you know, we are in support of model as legal document and open data standards. And that's huge, you know, to get that stakeholder support. I mean, it's got to work with all of us, you know, with the engineers, the contractors, the owners. So this was critical, and we're actually working with AGC, another national contracting group, to kind of get them on record. What's their policy? What's their stance? We also run into issues with risk and policy. You know, how do you sign and seal these digital deliverables? You know, in the U.S., we've had to check state statutes. You know, what is the licensing board? How does that work? Can you even sign and seal a digital deliverable? You know, so it's kind of been a state-by-state approach. Some states can make this work within their existing licensing requirements. Some states are having to go through a rulemaking process to change that. So that's another issue to think about as you move toward model as a legal document as well. So a couple of key takeaways to think about. And this is in the context of trying to move your agency to digital delivery. So a couple of considerations. One is you have to assess your current status. You know, where is your agency at? You know, where are they at with digital workflows and BIM and technology? So really need to understand where you're at. You need to set a goal with your leadership. You know, I can tell you a lot of the states that we work with, they have strong support from their leadership. In many cases, their leadership has a challenge goal for the agency. Like I mentioned, the Pennsylvania 2025 Digital Delivery Directive. That 2025 came from top leadership with PennDOT, you know, to really challenge their staff to get there. I'm a big believer you've got to plan your next steps. You know, you really need to develop a strategic plan. You need to, it's a huge undertaking to move a public agency across the board to digital delivery. So I'm a big believer in developing a strategic plan, having tactical goals, having strategic goals, and really mapping out, and of course updating that plan every year too. You've got to identify your internal champions as well. You know, we've seen that with the public agencies, dedicated staff that are driving, you know, BIM for infrastructure and digital delivery within the agency. I mean, everyone's busy. Everyone, you know, this needs to be a full-time focus of staff to really drive it. You got to learn from others. You know, I think that's important. There's a lot of folks that are trying to do these same things. Of course, ask for help if you need it, and then embrace open data standards. So that's what I'd leave you with today with this, but just wanted to give you a sense of some of the things going on. A couple of resources just to share with you. I'm on the executive committee of the buildingSMART USA chapter. I'm the Roads and Bridges Industry Chair. We do a monthly webinar series. These are free, these are open. They alternate between industry and technical topics. So I did include the link to those here. And I also wanted to mention too, we did pull together what we call a national BIM for infrastructure webinar series, where if you really want to understand where the U.S. is going on the transportation side, this is a great series to look at. We've saved all the webinars. These are 2-hour webinars. We've done 5 of these. The next one we plan to do is in January, where we're actually going to have the contractors come and talk to us about where are they at with digital delivery, what do they see as the opportunities and challenges, and this is just a really good way to kind of get a sense of the U.S. and where we're at and where we're going. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Will. Again, a lot of activity, I think, that can really inform the Canadian road ahead and increase collaboration between the Department of Transportation and the Ministry of Transports. I think can help Canadian Ministries of Transport move ahead. Our next presenter is Michael Kennerly, Director of the Design Bureau at the Iowa Department of Transportation and also Chair of AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Okay, my job is to try to keep you awake long enough to get to the next two presenters. You've heard a lot about the Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards, and you've heard a lot about or at least you've been referenced in terms of the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. And what I want to do this afternoon is give you just a little bit of a deeper dive on both of those, trying to help you understand where we are and pretty much where we're going. But I wanted to start with this. We keep talking about AASHTO, and I don't know if everybody knows what AASHTO is, but AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway Transportation, officials, and it's really just kind of a grouping of the states. They all got together to kind of standardize the way we do business as states. And it's divided up into 4 regions. You see them there in the colors: the MASTO region, SASTO, WASHTO, NASTO. Don't ask me, guys. But it's divided up into 4 regions, and that's pretty much how we do business in terms of working through AASHTO. The AASHTO committee structure, I don't know if you've seen this, but this just kind of gives you an overview of what AASHTO is, and there's a lot of similarities between the way AASHTO is structured and actually BSI. But, we've got, all the different disciplines represented, in terms of, the construction and maintenance and operations and asset management and design and bridge. Those are all different committees underneath, underneath the AASHTO umbrella. And then underneath those committees, you have technical committees. And that's where I come in terms of the Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards. And one of the things that drove that creation of that was the early struggles that we were facing. A lot of states had started to move in this direction, but it was really one of those things where we really didn't know how to get started. We really didn't know how to put this all together. And so rather than just having 50 states struggle independently, we decided to form a group that would kind of guide how we did this, or at least give states some guidance, some reference material that they could use in terms of developing their own efforts. And so the AASHTO, Joint Technical Committee was created in 2016, and you've heard a lot of people talk about, the committees being cross-discipline. And this was one of the first committees that was actually cross-discipline, and it was intentional. Because when we looked at this committee, and one of the things that I really lobbied for as chair was that we involve as many of the disciplines as possible, including folks outside of the AASHTO structure in terms of ACEC, the AG, I hate saying stuff like this, the Association of General Contractors. And we also involve vendors like Bentley, and others, because all of us have to work together in order to make this real. And so rather than having a committee that was just made up of just design engineers, realizing that we impacted construction, we impacted operations, we impacted bridges and structures, I felt it was important to have representation from all of those disciplines as part of this committee structure. So when we came together, this is the scope that was initially proposed for the committee, as well as the mission and the vision. And one of the things that was really key here, and I highlighted, it says, Given the industry has not adopted a standard file format and agencies use more than one vendor for CAD software, the goal should be to outline the information needs for both the agency and the industry partners, as opposed to establishing a standard file format. We had recognized, even when we were first starting, that the biggest problem that we faced was there was no standard format. There was no standard agreed upon industry schema. There was a couple of out there that were good, but they hadn't been fully developed. And one of the things that came along with that was the issue of not just development, but maintenance and updating those standards. This just talks about, the goals of the committee. I'm just going to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, I know you guys will have the opportunity to review these later. And more than anything, I wanted you to have it because I know as you're working on your efforts, one of the things that we discovered was, if we can basically utilize something that somebody has already done, it makes it a lot easier for us. And so a lot of the information that's in here, I don't really intend to go through in detail, but as you start to review these presentations and you're looking for, well, how did they do and how can we use, I wanted to include that information just as a guide. But then when it came to the committee itself, we put together a work plan, and what we were trying to do, again, was identify the areas that we thought were crucial in regard to moving, this digital workflow along. And one of the things that we recognized is that as we start looking at the end game, as I call it, for all of this, for us as state agencies, is asset management. Because the ideal is that, you want to have the information that you need, to manage your assets efficiently. And so as we started looking at what are the tasks that we should take on, one of those was trying to develop guidance on how to get to asset management, how to utilize the information that comes back to you in a digital as-built, but more importantly, how to structure, what your database should look like, where this information is going to go. The other thing that we talked about, and Will highlighted, was level of development, which was a real big interest, as he noted, for the ACEC. And we felt that, again, if we're going to have industry partners, and the consultants are one of our partners, then this was something that we needed to take on. And we've actually gotten, I think, that one completed, and it should be posted on the website already, if not very soon, for anybody who would like to go and take a look at it and reference it. And then we also identified a webinar series, and that came out of, again, people not having any idea what this meant and how to get there. And so one of the things that we started doing was putting on a webinar series just to educate our members. And anybody can, sit in on the webinar series, but it's just the idea that there was a need for information, there was a need for education, and so, webinar series was one of those things that we thought was a good way to accommodate that. The other thing was, that we took on was guidance on how to develop the model as a legal document. And again, you don't know what you don't know, and if you don't know how to get there, somebody's got to try to provide some guidance to help you along that way. And so that was one of the other things that the committee said, we'll take on as a task and we'll develop that. George Lukes has been integral in leading that group and moving that along. We've also talked about trying to come up with a maturity model. And really what that really is, more than a maturity model, is basically how to get from, producing plans in 3D all the way to how do you, get information out of your plans with a digital as-built. We wanted to cover that entire scope, give states an idea of here are the things that you need to consider if you're going to do this. Here's some prerequisites, so to speak, and then here are some things that you should analyze before you take that next step in order to determine if you're ready for that next step. Because, again, you don't want to go too fast and you don't want to get ahead of yourself, because if you do, you're only going to end up having to go back, you're going to have frustration, you're going to have disappointment. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was, basically develop a checklist to say, okay, before you move from just 3D design to providing information to the contractors, here are the things that you should consider to determine whether or not you're ready. And we do that with each phase so that states can have basically a way of assessing their own maturity and their readiness for that next step. And then you've heard us talk a lot about the resolution to adopt IFC. And that was one of the things, again, that as we were looking at this idea that there's no one schema out there that everybody, that everybody uses, as we were looking around and trying to figure out what we could use and basically, kind of stumbled into IFC, the more we looked at it, the more it became attractive to us. And the more we recognize that as it's being utilized internationally and the standard is growing, vendors are becoming, a part of this and adopting it, that as we looked at, what should we do as state and transportation agencies, we recognize the importance of adopting IFC, and like you've heard, the resolution had the adoption of IFC as one component. The aspect of trying to join BSI, which we thought was beneficial. Having a voice, we thought was beneficial, and so that was one of the things that we proposed. And then, like Mike alluded to, a few minutes ago, having that cross-discipline committee that would then, kind of guide, how we adopted IFC, and more than anything, kind of coordinate all the things that are going on. And reality, I'm going to cover two, they cover two. The truth is, guys, there's a lot more than that going on. And we need the opportunity to try to coordinate all these efforts so that then we're not duplicating work, but more importantly, we're leveraging what others have done. And so now I want to move to the second one, which is the BIM for infrastructure pooled fund. And kind of like the committee that Mike, is talking about, this is relatively new. Now, there's another pooled fund, BIM for bridges, and that's been around for 4 or 5 years, and they have made tremendous progress. And, one of the things that we recognized was that there was no there was no component that covered the rest of the discipline, of the horizontal infrastructure. And so when we looked at, so do we just put together a pooled fund that focuses on highways, we really thought that was a waste. And so that's the reason why this one is called BIM for infrastructure, because what we wanted to do was kind of bring all of these efforts together again. And so when you look at the BIM for infrastructure, one of the things that we are targeting is not just developing guidance for how you handle the highway component, but how you handle and blend in what's already been done by the bridge pooled fund. And so it's looking at how do we again set up all of the tools that state agencies are going to need to make this jump. And then what are some of the deliverables that we can provide states to help them in that jump, including training, and information on all the other aspects, that go into making this a reality. In terms of the member states, and a pooled fund is basically what it sounds like. You have a bunch of states that agree to put money into a pot, that then gets utilized to make this effort, this work plan come to life. And right now, we've got about 19 states, including Iowa. Iowa is the lead state. We've got a total commitment so far of a little over $2 million, and we just put out a proposal or request for proposals to hire a consultant to help put this work plan into place to make it basically come alive. And one of the things that the work plan relies heavily on is this advancing BIM for infrastructure roadmap that the FHWA produced about 2 years ago. And there's a lot of good information in that if you're ever interested in, again, looking for a resource in terms of how to get from here to there. And the screen there gives you kind of an overview of what's in that. And again, it's got a really good approach in terms of developing a digital workflow. And again, I think it would be a really good resource for anybody who's looking to move down that road. And one of the things that we often talk about is the importance of R&D in this effort, because R&D is critical. But R&D doesn't mean what you think it means, at least not when we talk about it. When we're talking about R&D, what we're talking about is rip off and duplicate. If somebody's already done something, rip it off and duplicate it. And so, as you guys are looking at how to move this effort along, I would strongly encourage as much R&D, rip off and duplicate as you can, because there's no sense in going through the same pain that many of us have already gone through to get to where we are. If you can learn from our mistakes, and if you can build on our shoulders, or conversely, we can build on your shoulders, all of us move along and all of us benefit. In terms of the proposal, the proposal went out on September the 15th. The proposals are due, or the request for proposals went out on the 15th. They're due on the 1st. It's a 5-year pooled fund, and like I said, I think one of the things that we really want to do is leverage what's already existing. And a few years ago for a presentation, I was working with NCHRP, and I asked them, give me kind of an estimate of how much research into this issue has already occurred, how much work has already been done, and I was amazed at the report I got back, and there was over 100 different studies on various topics related to BIM and digital workflow. And that represents the work of a lot of individuals, that we can already utilize and don't have to try to reinvent. And those NCHRP studies are available to anybody. And I would encourage you to take a look at those, as basically just a way to start and a way to maybe stimulate ideas and maybe even solutions to some of the things that you're looking at. And so, that's the quick and dirty on those two efforts. Like I said, there's a lot more going on, anytime you'd like to talk a little bit more about this with any of us, you can, you've got the contact information. We are more than willing to sit down with folks and share, our experiences, some of which were not good. Some of which we would like to take back, but at the same time, it's again, the thing I try to encourage staff, as we talk about this, is that we're going to make mistakes. There's no way to do this and not make mistakes. There's going to be oopses along the way, but as long as we learn from those and we keep moving forward, it's okay. And so like I said, you can learn from our mistakes. We can learn from yours, and as long as we as a group are moving forward, I think we'll be okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Rip off and duplicate. I think that's, I like that. And do it effectively. And rip off the right places and duplicate the right places. Our next speaker is from the Utah Department of Transportation. He is a State Standards and Design Engineer. Please welcome George Lux. Lux, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. My name's George Lux. I'm from the Utah Department of Transportation. I'm also the Vice President for the Highway Engineering Exchange Program. The conference is IHEAP. This year it was in Florida. You've probably heard about the hurricane that was there. Next year it's going to be in Utah. Hopefully we can avoid an earthquake or something like that. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey toward model as the legal document and digital delivery lifecycle. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what problem we're trying to solve, our approach and our timeline, the projects that we've done to date, the design approach, our use cases and tools, and also the data transfer to construction. So in 2013, the AASHTO annual conference, our project development director, Randy Park, went, and the conversation was around making the model the legal document, and he came back and decided that's what we were going to do. So we moved in that direction, and one of the first things we did actually was went to Iowa and visited Mike's crew. They had been making electronic files available to contractors, and we wanted to kind of get a head start on that. The other problem that we were trying to address here is the contractor platform. Contractors do not use the same tools that we do. We use typically Bentley products or Autodesk, maybe Allplan, Carlson, and contractors typically are using Tribble Business Center, Leica, TopCon, AgTech, things like that. That's a huge problem. So the progression of the contractor methodology is such that contractors originally, maybe going back 15 or 20 years ago, they would take a paper plan set that we advertised, and they would take that set and they would build a 3D model from that, and then they would use that for automated machine guidance. I think someone earlier in the conference was talking about the telephone game, where you whisper something into someone's ear and it goes around the table, and then when you get to the end, it's actually kind of funny to hear what actually came out. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. If you build a 3D model and then you flatten it, and then you give it to the contractor to try and build a model from, it's probably not going to come out the same way. As we got to about the last decade or so, maybe 15 years ago, contractors would start asking for electronic files. And we would give them those electronic files, but it's usually after the project was awarded and not during the advertising set. So they would build a model from that, although that was a challenge as well. Traditional methodology for the owners, at least for us, is that we would use the model to create the sheets, and we have a very short timeline on our projects. So typically, the model was not what the what the effort was. It was the plan production. So a lot of times we didn't model it fully or as much as we needed to. We did enough to make the plans. And so what would happen is sometimes those model files were not great. And when contractors got them, they had to use what they had, and it was hard for them to puzzle it back together. The platform differences are just a challenge. Contractors do not use the same platform. They don't use the same files, and so getting those back together is really hard. We take away the sheets, and now they don't have something to QC it with, so that becomes a huge, huge problem. Our implementation strategy. We started with low risk, low complexity. The project we started with was in rural Utah. It was a $3 million construction project. Really no right-of-way, no drainage, nothing like that. And what we wanted to do was use a delivery method called CMGC. That's where the contractor sits in on the pre-construction phase to kind of go over the risk. We usually would never use it on a project like this, but the risk was making the model the legal document. So we had the contractor sit on in that. To give you an idea of the timeline, we did this in Bentley SS4. When the contractor came on, we gave him the files. It took about, I want to say, 3 months of the designer and the contractor going back and forth before the contractor felt comfortable that the Trimble Business Center model matched the SS4 model. And it was close. I think we had 40,000 cubic yards, and it was within a yard or so on the dirt work. So this was basically the strategy we would use, and we would say, okay, if this worked, then we would move on to more complex projects. But if it didn't, we weren't going to give up. We just wanted to go back and do lessons learned and then go through the project again. We used the same strategy where we would take that success on an easy project and go to a bid-build scenario, and at the same time increase the risk and use CMGC to make sure that our model files work properly. And then as we had success with that, we would move on to sort of an urban reconstruct bid-build if the CMGC worked out, and then we continue that strategy for the highest risk and the highest complexity projects like interstate projects, where we use CMGC first and then go to the bid build. So our timeline is, in 2014, we made a decision to make the model the legal document by the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. Like I said, we chose a very simple project, $3 million construction. Probably could have done that without even cutting sheets, for that matter. It was that easy. But over the course of the year, we held workshops, identified risks, got contractors involved, and we did not quite make that timeline 2015, but we were able to award that contract in early 2016, so we were pretty close. On that project, ended up being successful. The contractor was very helpful. We had about a 90-day construction period, and I think we finished that project in about 70 days, so we were about 3 weeks early. A lot of that was attributed to the model being the legal document, as well as implementation of our construction software, Origo. As we moved along, we started realizing that we could look toward more complex projects and also discontinue cutting sheets. And so as we started doing that, we thought probably the best thing to look at is a repeatable process, something that's similar to plan sheets, where we would go through a process and not cut sheets and have data go directly to construction for contractors for inspection. So in 2019, we were awarded a federal aid grant, and that was for $1 million. And we have used that to bring in resources. So for a DOT like us, resources is a struggle. Getting additional help to do things is really a problem, but the information that we can gather by getting more resources in the form of consultants really has been huge, and it's helped us develop essentially a repeatable process from design to construction. As 2021 came along, digital as-builts were something that we've been focusing on, and we got a second aid grant, and we're using that for digital construction and data capture. And then as we're going along, we have a strategic plan for digital twin, and we're starting the journey of trying to figure out how to push data around. So open data standards is just a huge, gigantic thing for this industry. Model as a legal document. We have awarded 17 projects now with the model as a legal document. 5 of those have been using CMGC, where we have the contractor sitting in, and those have probably gone away after 2018 or so. We've gotten comfortable enough that we feel like we can do it without bringing the contractor in the pre-construction stage. All of those projects we've used rovers or mobile devices in the field. Of those 17 projects, 16 are fully constructed. In fact, I think now the 17th has been fully constructed. 10 of those projects we awarded, we did not cut any sheets. So we went directly from design to construction, and we used mobile devices in the field. Of those, 2 are bridge and structure projects. So our model use cases, we use it for design review. Now, on those 17 projects, frankly, we did not use it on all of those. We'd have to figure out different ways to do it because tools weren't available the way we needed. Now, if we had sheets, we probably were using that methodology in the review phase instead of using mobile devices. But as tools have become available, we're now using the model. We're using tools from Autodesk, from Bentley, from Trimble, and those are all tools that are kind of augmenting or supplementing those that we're using for Esri as well, for our GIS. We're using it for quantities. We're exporting quantities and making that much more useful in the way that we're transferring that information to construction. We use it for clash detection. It's super helpful to try to avoid those change orders that we might get in the field. Contractors are using automated machine guidance, and they're using the models that we give to them. Now, they're not directly, but we're using Land XML or something like that. And again, open standards will help that significantly. In the field, we have viewers. We've used several different viewers, and I'll get to that in a second. But we're not using sheets anymore on these projects, so we need to have viewers out in the field that both contractors and our construction crews can use. Right now, it's limited inspection recording. We're using different software, but what we want to get to the point is where we're using one solution. Probably the biggest complaint we get is that our crews like this, but we have so many different tools they've got to switch between that they kind of beg us, please just give us one tool. And then digital as-builts. That's one of the things we're working on right now, trying to actually define what that means and where we're going to put that information when we get it back. So in design and construction, the tools that we've been using, we've used Autodesk, Bentley, Trimble, and then various types of Esri solutions. Autodesk, we've used Civil 3D. We are not an Autodesk state from a DOT perspective, but we have delivered a project using Autodesk products, using Civil 3D and BIM 360. We did it on purpose to try and see if we could move in the direction of saying, we just want this deliverable, use whatever software is most comfortable for you. We use BIM 360 in the review phase as well as in the construction phase. For Bentley, we've used SS3, SS4, and ORD. We're currently using ORD, and we have a pretty sophisticated workspace. We've also used OpenRoads Navigator and Synchro in the field. Both of those have been pretty successful, and the tools are getting much better. In the pre-construction side, we've used iTwin Review. We've used that on 4 or 5 projects, and that tool also looks like it's going to be a great tool. We have a project live right now. It's a big project. It's about a $50 million project, and we're using iTwin Design Review for plan in hand in about 2 weeks. Trimble, we don't use Trimble Business Center too much. Our contractors do, but what we have piloted is Site Vision, and we did that in 2019 before it had the ability to bring over attributes and such. That tool looks like it's going to be a fantastic tool as well. We've used Esri on a lot of our projects. To us, that is the tool that we can be very confident that if for whatever reason on a pilot one of the other tools doesn't work, we can pivot to it. It is not perfect. It's a 2D solution. We have to make sure that the crews have cross-sections, elevations, profiles, things like that that are 3D solutions. But we feel like we can put those in the hands of our crews without sheets on pretty much any project. For data and file exchanges, in pre-construction, essentially what our biggest challenge was for contractors is naming conventions. They said that it was taking them anywhere between 2 days to 5 days just to figure that out, and then another couple of weeks to figure out how to put those files back together to get our contractors are probably 95% Trimble. They do use other software as well, but they said it would take them that much time on a 25-day advertising period. So that is a huge deal to make it so that they can put that model back together. If we had open standards and they could just open up right away, that would reduce time significantly. With the work that we've done, we've gotten to the point contractors say now it's between a half a day or on a very challenging project, maybe 2 days, they've got it all put back together. For advertising, we use ProjectWise, BIM 360, UDOT Project Explorer. We've used all of those on our projects. Our authoring software for model is the legal document. That is the legal document, and typically it's been either Autodesk or Bentley, mostly Bentley in our case. We've also had 4 information-only files, and those are the ones that the contractors use. In pre-construction, we've used OpenRoads Navigator for review, not too much. It's deprecated and we don't use it anymore. Bentley doesn't offer it. We've used PDF scroll plots to do reviews. iTwin Review, like I talked about, we used a BIM 360 that was extremely successful, and then GIS and Esri field maps as well. In construction, we've used Bentley Synchro. We also did use OpenRoads Navigator, but like I said, that's now deprecated. We've used PDF scroll plots. We've used BIM 360. We've used Esri significantly on these projects. And then Trimble Site Vision is one that we've piloted, but we have not actually used yet. I expect we will next year. Our data file use, we have a CAD validation tool. We also have a CAD to GIS, which is FME and Esri. We have a geodatabase that we put it all into, and a piloting data. And I'm going to run through this because the next screen I think is a better process for this. So our designers take the DGNs, they drop it into a portal, and it checks to make sure that the CAD standards have been followed. Once that has happened, we can then put it into a CAD to GIS converter. We're using FME to do that extraction. And then as we do that, our inspectors can have those tools in their hand, and we can take that information and we can move it into that enterprise geodatabase. Once we get all of the attributes and everything set and we get the as-builts, we can then move that into an asset management database. So we have concluded our first digital as-built, and we're in process of several others. We have 3 unique databases. We have one that was done by a LiDAR run of all of our roads, and we had all of the above ground features extracted into a geodatabase, and so we have the geospatial location with some attributes. We also have the information from the design that we have extracted with FME, and then we have a third database, which is our asset management database. So the unique ID that we have in our asset management database, ADAM, along with the unique ID that's tied to our LiDAR system that we've extracted, along with the design, have all been put together. And our first, this is a screenshot of our GIS. It shows that the statuses are removed. And then on the newer information that came back with the as-built, now that status is active or in production, so to speak. So we took the information, we updated the model, we did another extraction, and that created all of our data that we can move into our ADAM system. So ultimately what our vision is to have the data at the center of the organization. And we have a digital twin strategic plan, and this is sort of our vision graphic for it. So in the middle is theoretically all of the data. This is not going to be something that we're going to complete in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe not even the next 5 or 10 years. But what the basic thought is on this is that we have the ability to exchange data from our digital twin technology, where we have all of the data for all of our assets. So we have to have an element schema for every single feature on our system. That's a huge, gigantic lift. Once we get to that point, then what we expect to be able to do is use open data standards to be able to exchange data with any other vendor. So as an example, the thought that we're thinking of is, I'm going to give 2 examples. One is, we may be doing a review at plan in hand, and instead of saying we have to use tool X, we would say bring whatever tool is most comfortable for you, and then we've got the data in our digital twin technology, and you can use whether it's Trimble, Leica, Topcon, Autodesk, Bentley, or some other third-party viewer, or Esri. But everyone has the same access to the same data because it's in the center of your organization. I think the other part of this is that we would expect that if we're starting with a model, then we publish that information to the digital twin. Once we get to construction, our contractors are typically the ones that are in charge of those as-builts. And so they would take the information out of the digital twin, they would use whatever software they're going to be using. Like I said, in our state it's typically Trimble, and then they would process that as-built and then publish it back to the digital twin. So that's just the design and construction, and we still have to have the schema for the rest of the organization. So it's going to be quite a while, but this is sort of our vision graphic, and we also have a digital twin strategic plan that I think we've got a 2-year and a 5-year, and at the end of the 5 years we hope to be fully developed with single post signs and barrier. So with that, that's the end. I just wanted to say we have a website. It's digitaldelivery.utah.gov. There is an unbelievable amount of information there, along with videos and stuff. So if you've got a chance, take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, George. Very fascinating. It's interesting that there's sort of a common, every organization has a vision, but there's a very common thread to that vision, and it's accessing reliable data in a timely fashion. We're going to go out west to Vancouver. We had somebody from Calgary earlier, and now there's Andrew. So Andrew Walther, who's a senior consultant with the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure at the Geomatics and Design Division. So hopefully, Andrew, you can hear me, and we see you on the screen, and we're happy to have you here and happy to hear you present. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's an honor to be presenting at the buildingSMART conference, and I've attended many of the presentations so far. And for me, it's been interesting to learn about the different frameworks that different organizations work within to try to achieve a common goal. And so today I'm going to tell the story with the BC Ministry of Transportation. Okay, so let me just let's just go through BC MOTI by the numbers quickly. We're the westernmost province in Canada, about 1,200 kilometers north-south, 1,000 kilometers east-west, about 950,000 square kilometers in total, which is about double the size of California and the same size as perhaps France and Germany combined, albeit a fraction of the population to those other areas. This data is a little bit outdated, but in 2018, 2019, there's been about $1.5 billion invested in infrastructure, 42,000 kilometers, that's linear kilometers of roadway. The ministry has about 60 seats of Civil 3D, so this is an Autodesk shop. And then there's consultants that provide services, about 300 consultants are providing design services to the ministry on a regular basis. And, you know, to set the bar is to set the standard, and the ministry has always had a very put a very high value on models, and we'll get into that for a second. But really, it's the public agencies that are the leaders who make the policies and they set the rules. And so, really, they're in the best position to drive technology and drive the usage of the technology. As a consultant told me recently, they love to follow the rules. So, ministry's got quite a good set of rules to follow with regards to data. So a little bit of history here. Pantera was a software back in the mid-90s to 2006. Casey played a major role from 2006 to 2016. And my job was to help implement Civil 3D. So that's been in the geomatics and the design divisions. And then I have a Trimble Business Center icon there because we're just now working with the field services group, which is responsible for construction supervision. So all the survey and the design work is done in Civil 3D, and then all of our supervision work is done using Trimble Business Center. So my goal today is to, you know, demonstrate that regardless of what your interpretation of BIM is, it is 100% reliant on a comprehensive set of standards and quality design models. So obviously, CAD standardization has always been perhaps an issue of contention. We're individuals, everybody's got their own ideas. But I updated this common graphic to reflect that it's about the data. And that seems to be something that has been commonly referred to throughout a number of the different presentations. So it's not just the CAD, but it's about the data. So I'm just going to back you up here, give you a little my personal historical perspective. This is a project I worked on as a young transportation engineer in Mississauga, Ontario. And it was a grade separation project. And it was one of those few projects as a designer that I got to be involved with the preliminary design, the detailed design, and the construction, you know. And so we learned that back in the day, we would go after the planning projects. And that positioned us far superior to our competitors to get the subsequent detailed design, because we were using tools like DCA, Sofdesk, you know, going back a few years now, to do this work. But we would be able to roll that data, take the alignments, take the geometry, maybe update the surface, and roll that data into the detailed design. So that was arguably a BIM concept. And in fact, this project, and we're talking the early 90s, we actually made 3D models of this. And one of these homes here on the bottom right at a public information center, during the planning phase, we had an overpass versus an underpass option. And we could do a line of sight to see, okay, what's going to be your visual impact in this house based on if we were to go with the overpass. So fast forward a bunch of years, I wrote an article for Autodesk's user group journal, and basically it was Civil 3D, a BIM tool. And, you know, my interpretation of BIM through that article was that, you know, you build the model, you can do analysis, site distance, drainage, mass haul, renderings and animations, and then you can extract data. So you can extract your production drawings, you can extract your quantities and your layout data. Another component of BIM for transportation was moving the data through procurement. And we just spoke about that a moment ago, but obviously now the emphasis for the ministry is detailed design to construction. And then we'll talk about the asset register and asset management in the context of the ministry in a moment here. Sharing data within an individual project phase. So we talk about common data environments. You know, XREFs allow you to share a survey base plan across multiple drawings. And, you know, with Civil 3D, we can use data references to share design data. And we're going to be coming back to that. And then, you know, asset data repositories. So in British Columbia, there's a lot of emphasis on the local government's asset repositories. And we'll talk about that in a second here. But in research for this presentation, I drew some parallels between the Federal Highway Administration benchmarking report on BIM and these concepts, and looked at the different agencies. This is interesting. This is a slide that's been around for donkey's years. Not this particular slide, but rather than recreating the data through the various phases of a project, let's move that data. You know, one of the prior speakers spoke about contractors recreating data from hard copy plans and the telephone story. I forget what that was, but are they going to be actually creating that data properly? So for asset repositories, the ministry's focus is on construction. It's about construction supervision. If you're interested, I would check out BC's Master Municipal Construction Documents Association. So these are infrastructure data standards for local governments. And we are now providing standardized, what we call construction recorded deliverables to local governments. That's essentially a record of change so that they can automate the updates to their asset registers. But where the light bulb went off for me, I'm actually going to be highlighting on my slides a number of projects, was when we first started this Civil 3D project, I wanted to engage the contractors, being aware about all of these challenges and having been around for so many years now and watching data being recreated. And turned out that a whole bunch of them actually had design software, Civil 3D, Carlson Software, Trimble Business Center. And at the time, before we started, when they're using Casey, the deliverable to the contractors were hard copy drawings. And that's when I learned that these guys were actually redrawing information from the plans. So that is something that, in a way, the contractors are ahead of us here, because they're seeing there's value in recreating the design from the plans for the purpose of layout and building. So that's kind of where the light bulb went off for me. Yeah, the whole thing with having a great model is that you can move towards paperless. There's a path towards paperless design and construction. So the ministry has always put a high value on comprehensive standards and quality design models, and that is because of the construction supervision workflow, which is elemental for all road and highway projects in the province. And this is construction supervision is carried out by the ministry's field services division. So we've got the geomatics and design division, and then the field services division. And essentially all contractor payments are based on measured quantities. So that's because we don't really we're lucky if we get a borehole every 100 meters. We can assume a rock horizon, but there might be some earth on top of that, and the actual horizons, the actual surfaces are very often going to be different than what the designer was able to design to. Another interesting component here is that the design models, so we do our corridor models in Civil 3D, our corridor models are actually rerun against the actual horizons. And so in this slide, you can see a cross-section where the designer assumed a rock horizon, so that's a type A. But when we start getting out in the field and we start doing our excavation, we can see that this area here is the actual type A horizon, and there's earth, or what we call type D material, or dirt, above that, and that changes the cross-section. So, and it changes, it lets you know what your grading, your modified grading impacts are going to be, and also, more importantly, I guess, for payment for the contractors. So what is actually being done versus what was designed, just dealing with those discrepancies. So we also, the field services construction supervision workflow also conducts surveys for spot, linear, and area quantities, and QA on the contractor layout. So this is all about having the data. So to facilitate the construction supervision, we put together a Civil 3D terms of reference, and this is for the geomatics and design workflows. And before I started doing this work, the same with Civil 3D, the same terms of reference document existed for Casey, and it was all to support the handoff of data to the construction supervision team so that they could do their work properly. I talked about the contractors recreating digital data from hard copies, and I actually got mixed up on my slides, but I'll talk to the other point that I meant to talk about now. And when I saw the level of detail that went into the sub-assemblies that we're developing to make our typical cross-sections for our designs, and I started seeing these models produced, I actually approached the then head of geomatics and design. I said, you know what, the minute you guys are in a really good position to kind of go full BIM by taking the design data forgetting about production drawings and moving that data to the field. You know, obviously it's a long path, 5 to 10 years, whatever it is, but a colleague of mine that I work with from Bulgaria was telling me that that's the way they had constructed projects. They weren't using construction drawings. So really interesting just to see, you know, that the light bulbs go off when you see the quality of these models. So let's just go through quickly our geomatic standards. This is an active project that we've been working on, Highway 14 in Souk, and everything is standardized, and that's the key. So folder structure names, drawing names, the point ID. So we use the date and the surveyor initials in the point ID. Point descriptions, the attributes, the allowable attributes, how we work with both grid and ground data. So the ministry, all the production drawings are ground-based. That accommodates a drop in the millionth value of the northing and a conversion from grid to ground using a scale factor. Surface naming conventions, we've got survey original ground, we've got LiDAR original ground, and we combine those to create a combined original ground surface. We have drawing production standards that make use of AutoCAD's sheets set manager, tools and training. And that's the key to a lot of this, is that, you know, through the development process, we provide training. The ministry provided hours and hours and hours of video-based training to their partners to enable them to do what's being asked of them, you know. And I always looked at the KC example. Before Civil 3D, we had a heck of a lot of KC experts in the province, really people that were pushing the limit. And now we can say that with Civil 3D. And it's not just the training, but it's all the tools that the ministry is providing. So all of our typical cross sections that we provide for the design, the assemblies in Civil 3D, incorporate ministry cross section standards. So by providing all of these tools, it actually is a motivation for the consultants to get on board and get on board with using these tools and then using the training so that they can learn. Now, having said that, we are fortunate in BC. We're not dealing with, you know, multiple different design platforms. Most of the consultants, if not all of the consultants, are using Civil 3D. So when we talk about handoff, so what do the surveyors do? So that, right, what you see here is our folder structure for a typical project, our standardized folder structure. And we've separated this into design model drawings and production drawings. And the red folders are the surveyors folders. And essentially that whole folder structure, it sounds a bit simple, but it gets zipped up and sent over to the designers. And if there's any addendums or updates, you just take the whole folder structure. Okay, so let's look at some of these CAD standards, applicable design, same thing, folder structures, drawing names. How are you supposed to represent a feature? Is it an alignment? Is it a feature line? Is it a polyline? Is it a line? Layers and block definitions, naming conventions for alignments, profiles, and corridors. A lot of that was already in place. So just from Casey, custom subassemblies, corridor region names, design surfaces and material names, all standardized. That's a big one right there, cross-section point coding. So all of the key points on the cross-section all have standardized names. And therefore that makes, if you're working with that data from a construction perspective, you know exactly what the PSH is, the PD1, the PD2, the POT, whatever. So all of those cross-section codes are standardized. Drawing production standards, so the look and the feel of the drawings is always the same. And once again, providing tools and training. So this is where things got tricky now. So the handoff to the construction supervision team. So let's just talk about the technical highlights here. This is important. Our data is all shared in that entire folder structure. There's no duplication of data. So that means that all of those changes can propagate naturally through all of the dependent drawings. This is another big one here. So the production drawings source the data from the design model drawings. They're fully connected, and that was a requirement right from the get-go. We got pushback on that, but we have design model drawings, so our corridors, our surfaces, and then our production drawings. And all of the data is referenced from those corridor or from those design model drawings. And what that does is it gives us confidence in the design model data. And that's been now going on probably for about 3 or 4 years. And that's a huge step, in my opinion, to really moving things towards full BIM. I think arguably what we're doing now is definitely BIM, but getting off paper and moving the data from the design to the field, this is an important step. And so if there's any design addendums or updates, we don't go back to the production drawings and then just do our AutoCAD drafting. We actually update the models, go into the production drawing, refresh the references and the annotations and whatever else update. Another highlight of this is the construction tender data. So recently we were approached by BC road builders, well, a couple of years ago, I should say, and they wanted data for tendering. And we'll talk about that here shortly. And then we're also providing construction supervision data to the construction supervision team. So the data from the design goes to tender, and then also to the construction supervision teams that are basically keeping on top of the contractors. So this is an example of just quickly some of the data sharing diagrams. It looks a little bit involved, but yeah, so it just describes the relationships between the different drawings in a particular archive or project. Okay, so I'm just going to speed things up here a bit. The construction tender data package. So contractors are not required to use Civil 3D. Designers and surveyors, that's the tool, Civil 3D. The ministry could do that because most designers and surveyors already were using the software. But we wanted to apply application neutral data. PDFs, DWG, AutoCAD drawings are fairly universal. Alignment profile XML, existing proposed surfaces in XML, excavation and area reports, and then that tender data package would be updated if there's any addendums as we go forward. So now contractors can focus on construction execution. The numbers are the numbers, right? So a bid should not favor one contractor because they counted the number of catch basins or the volumes that they came up with were more favorable. The numbers are the numbers. Let's focus on the execution and the tenders. And this was once again instigated or initiated, I should say, by BC Road Builders and Heavy Construction Association. So that's just been happening now for the last couple of years. And then, when you look at the design model data, so this is an actual screenshot of Civil 3D. This is a project that's just finishing up construction. The design models are great. They're tight, they're accurate, they're correct, they're representative. And it's amazing that when you see these models, what we can actually do. And then the assemblies I mentioned have logic built into them. So we can check for cut or fill. We can check on whether or not there's rock. If there's rock, insert a rock ditch with a 1/2 slope. And I mentioned the point codes there. So all of these tools and these sub-assemblies for doing the design are provided to the consultant. So how do we enforce these standards? Well, we came up with a data compliance. It's not only contractually required, so designers are contractually obligated to follow the terms of reference, but we put together a checklist because we didn't want that's done at 90%. We didn't want the contractors to get the data before it's too late. We wanted to make sure that our ducks were all in a row and everything was, I's dotted, T's crossed by the time the tender's been awarded. So we're reviewing the data at 90%. And we just check for, standardized items here, object naming standards. That's a big one. Constructability checks, and then, tender data exports. So that's done at 90% detailed design. And I mentioned that the consultants are contractually required to adhere to the terms of reference. Okay, so handoff to construction supervision. So we created we didn't want the surveyors, the construction surveyors to have to know Civil 3D. Their tool now, and this is all just happening, is Trimble Business Center. So we essentially provide data from the archive, from the design archive to the construction supervision team. That is really, we're not into IFC yet, but it is application neutral in that it's XMLs, PDFs, and DWGs. And we've got templates in TBC that can consume all of this data so that there's no reliance on the supervision teams to have to use Civil 3D. All right, so we've now set the precedent for data and CAD standards. What's next? We do not have a formal BIM initiative with the ministry. There's a new director of geomatics and engineering, and that's, That's going to come, but we definitely need to formalize that initiative. Just a technical item here. We don't have standardized item numbers. The amount of customization and data leveraging that we could do with standardized contract item numbers is phenomenal. So that's something that's obviously going to take some time to get through, but we're just starting those discussions. Obviously, continuing to update the terms of reference, our field services workflow. So my contract now is with the field services group. We've done the survey, we've done the design, and now we're working with the construction group. InfraWorks. Okay, so there's a big part of the puzzle here. We want to get InfraWorks. The teams had some training, but we want to officially use this for the front end, the planning, you know, and then roll that planning, reusing the data through the project life cycles into detailed design. And then obviously some sort of cloud-based common data environment where we can live share data. And the questions I have really, you know, that need to explore and hoping to learn and discuss more at this conference, certifying digital data, you know, the topics come up a lot. And then if we have a common data environment, I have to, you know, in my mind, sort out, okay, how do we trigger project milestones? How do we trigger a 50% review? How do we trigger a 90% review? That sort of thing. So at 11:55 my time, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. That was a great, very deep dive. We're 4 minutes off, so we'll actually have 4 minutes added to our break. I'd like to thank the speakers for this session. Very informative, you know, key takeaways around the sort of the amount of work that needs to happen, but that there's a lot of movement, a lot of synergies and potential to learn. And also, what was interesting, I think, with the last conference was around sort of this hybrid. We're in this transition, you know, where we're still dealing with, you know, hierarchical, older structures, moving towards sort of a more data-centric approach, and having to contend with that transition. So we can go for the break. Just a couple of notes. The last session will start at 3:30. We'll be on sort of opening up the discussion on enabling an open BIM-based digital twin ecosystem for Canada. We will have a French presentation at the end, so if you wish, please get some headphones for the translation, or else have a nice break. Thank you.